Good morning, Internet. We are live. If you are out there, if you could please let me know you can hear me, that would be greatly appreciated. As always, I appreciate you tuning in. It is March 18th, 2019, and I have what I believe to be a very exciting show for you today. So, over the last couple of years, we've heard a lot of talk about fake news. What is new? What is real news and what is fake news? And clearly, there is a lot of debate over the issue. People don't quite have it figured out because if you asked half the country what has been going on over the last 2 years, they would give you a completely different story than the other half of the country. So how do we get to a point where we know our interpretation, our view of the world, is the correct one? Scott Adams often describes the paradox of people having completely different worldviews as if they're watching two different movies. As if two people show up at the movie theater and they both sit down and they look at the same screen, but they watch two completely different movies. And it's a great metaphor because in a lot of ways, that is the cause of the divide in our society. So you say, oh, well, you know what? It's the mainstream media. They're out there. They're giving us the truth. And then other people come along and say, no, it's not the mainstream media. It's the alternative news. It's grassroots people. It's Classical Learner. It's TomFFRnews. They're out there and they're giving you the truth. And then people start to argue and they say, no, my guy's telling me the truth. And then you say, no, it's the New York Times that's telling me the truth. It's CNN that's telling me the truth. It's Alex Jones that's telling me the truth. It's Fox News that's telling me the truth. No, it's Huffington Post that's telling me the truth. Well, how do we get to the truth? Because overall, we live in a society of people who have not the faintest idea of how to discover what information is reliable versus what information is unreliable. So because of that, we see people on the right, we see people on the left, we see people who go to the mainstream, we see people who go to alternative journalists who simply look to authority to tell them what is true. They go with what feels good. They go with, this person is the person I trust, and therefore this person is telling me the truth. Well, we're going to get into today how to discover the truth for yourself so you don't have to rely on authority. So, over the weekend, I finally got around to watching Mike Cernovich's documentary, Hoaxed, which basically was designed to expose some of the fake news narratives that come out of the mainstream media. And the documentary did a very good job on multiple levels. And the first level it started with, which is the primary level that I speak to most people about because I am a historian. I did major in history, at least in my undergraduate program, history education, is the history of the mainstream media. And this started with really in just the last 100 years and some of the things that the media has been responsible for, reported dishonestly about, or covered up that led to not just fake news, but the deaths of millions of people. So the documentary started with the Holodomor, which is basically the genocide of the Ukrainian people. And Ukraine had been the breadbasket of Europe. And in order for the Soviet Union to get them in line, basically the Soviet Union intentionally starved what had been the breadbasket of Europe. The Soviet Union intentionally starved, some estimate 10 million people to death. And Walter Duranty was, and you could read more about this in, what is the book? American Betrayal by Diana West. She really gets into this. It's a great book, by the way. Walter Duranty was the primary news correspondent for the New York Times. And of course, this wasn't in the age of the internet. People didn't have smartphones. People didn't have television. So what the New York Times said, that's what people believed. So Walter Duranty goes to the Soviet Union. He visits the Ukraine, and he sees, and he openly admitted this later on. He talked about this. You could look this up. It's all verifiable. He admitted that, well, all right, let me start with what he reported. He reported that everything was fine, that, yeah, you know, there might be some hungry people in the Ukraine, but, you know, most people have food, and it's certainly not them being starved by the government. Now, in reality, the people in the Ukraine looked the same way the Jewish people looked in concentration camps. But Walter Duranty, for very selfish reasons, lied about what he had seen, and later on he had admitted that, yes, he saw the starving people. And because of that, the people of America didn't realize how monstrous the Soviet Union was at the time, that they were starving what had accounted to be possibly 10 million people to death in the Ukraine. Then Hoaxed goes to talk about the Vietnam War. Now, if you've done some research, you know that Robert McNamara, which was a high-ranking government official during the Vietnam War, has since admitted that there was an incident known as the Gulf of Tonkin in which American ships were said to be fired upon. And the government and the media, they went out in front of the American people and said our ship was fired upon, and used the outrage based on our ship being attacked to get the American public behind the escalation of the Vietnam War. Of course, the news media and the government knew this wasn't true. They didn't look any further. They reported it as true. How many great young Americans died in Vietnam? My father actually volunteered to go to Vietnam. If he was a little bit more unlucky, I might not be here right now. So these are major cover-ups by the mainstream media. Then you go to more recent history, the Gulf War. The mainstream media plastered all over the television for everyone to see what had been a teenage girl crying as she testified in front of Congress. And basically she testified that Iraqi soldiers had gone into hospitals in Kuwait, and they had taken newborn babies, crying, breathing, adorable newborn babies, out of incubators, and dropped them on the floor and left them there to die. And you had this teenage girl crying about what she had allegedly seen, and of course the American people were outraged. They said, oh yeah, get the troops over there. Let's show them what America's all about. Well, as it turns out, this teenage girl was the daughter of an American ambassador to the United States of America, and she had a vested interest in getting America to enter into the Gulf War. But the mainstream media didn't report on this honestly. The mainstream media didn't have a big campaign coming clean when it turned out that this was false. No, the media's lies, pushing the government's lies, because they're very intertwined, and we'll get to that in a second with Operation Mockingbird, led to the deaths of, again, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And then, of course, the most recent war in Iraq, the second invasion of Iraq following 9/11, in which the government loosely attempted to make the American people believe that the government in Iraq had anything to do with 9/11, which we now know they didn't. If anyone had anything to do with 9/11, it's Saudi Arabia, and we never stopped selling them bombs so that they can kill innocent women and children in Yemen. Remember that next time the media tells you how much they care about women and children. But the media pushed the lie, they pushed the narrative that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And of course they used the fear-mongering. They said Saddam Hussein, who they've already led the public to believe was loosely tied to 9/11 when he wasn't, he might give these bombs to a terrorist, and they might blow up a nuclear bomb right in New York City. So there's tremendous fear-mongering, and the American public gets behind what was the American invasion of Iraq. It was not a war of defense, it was not a war of democracy, it was an American invasion. But the media serves the deep state, the media serves the military-industrial complex. And that's why it's very important that people understand this history. And we are going to get, so we are going to get to where I show you how to make sure that you understand this history, how to make sure that your children understand this history, and how to make sure that you promote media literacy and overall literacy in terms of determining truth in your young readers. And of course, Operation Mockingbird, uncovered by the Church Committee in the 1970s. This was a congressional committee. And what the Church Committee had uncovered is that the CIA had deep ties to the American mainstream media. They had infiltrated the American mainstream media on multiple levels. They had infiltrated the media with actual operatives, someone like Anderson Cooper, who had gone into CIA training for one summer. He is essentially royalty. He's the Vanderbilt line, that's American royalty. And after flunking out of the CIA after just one summer, decided it wasn't for him. He quickly got a job at CNN and catapulted to being one of the most influential newsmen in America. Not bad for a dropout. But, so they had infiltrated the mainstream media, as well as, this is dating back to the 1970s, the CIA, the government, had given what amounts to be billions of dollars worth of money, adjusted for inflation today, to mainstream media news organizations. The CIA admitted that they were ghostwriting articles, giving them to their operatives within the mainstream media, and those articles were being published. And it didn't just stop at that. They had infiltrated radio. They had infiltrated the publishing industry, the publishing of books, so that the American government was using the American media to control information. And the primary result of the Church Committee was basically no reform. So they got caught, there was no reform. If you don't think that's what's still happening today, but on a much larger scale, a much more sophisticated scale, as the deep state has had many, many years to refine their strategies, then, well, I think you need to hear what I have to say about literacy in terms of understanding the truth. So the documentary did a very good job of that, but it wasn't just on the level of history. The documentary did a good job of showing how the opponents of the mainstream media are character assassinated, because if the media is serving objectives, if they're serving the interest of essentially what would be the influence of money, then their objective would be to push an agenda. And if their agenda is opposite of the truth, then their objective is to assassinate the truth. And that's why you see a lot of character assassinations of independent journalists. Also because independent journalists are a threat financially to the old dinosaur media. So what the media does a lot of times, we saw that this week, right? There was, unfortunately, a tragic shooting in New Zealand, and right away the mainstream media pointed to independent journalists and said, these are the people that are responsible for this shooting. So they'll try to loosely tie independent journalists to a tragic event, a shooting, and say, we need to deplatform them, you need to not watch them, these people are hateful, these people are terrible. Well, that's pretty hypocritical given the history that I just laid out, in which the mainstream media is quite literally responsible for pushing lies which led to the deaths of millions and millions and millions of people. The Vietnam War, covering up the Holodomor, the Gulf War, the Second War in Iraq. These are lies that are world-altering. And how many women, how many children, how many men were killed because of those lies? How many American soldiers? In the United States of America, an American soldier commits suicide, the latest statistics say, at a rate of 22 people per day. War is horrific, and the media is the propagandist arm behind the military-industrial complex. So the documentary goes into how case studies on how independent journalists have been character assassinated. One interesting case study is Cassie Jaye. Cassie Jaye was a feminist. She had made a number of very successful documentaries pushing a feminist agenda. So Cassie decided she was going to make a documentary exposing men's rights activists. She wanted to expose men's rights activists for the misogynist that they truly are. And upon doing her research, she was shocked. She was red-pilled, which is why she changed the name of her documentary to Red Pill. She started to do all this research into men's rights activists to show how hateful they were, and realized that they weren't hateful at all. She realized that they were actually pushing a very positive message, that they were fighting for injustice that men face in the legal system in the United States of America. For example, women win 70% of child custody cases during divorces, right? Men are slaughtered by the divorce system, and many more things that men's rights activists fight for. So Cassie J discovered that she was wrong about her perception of men's rights activists, and she had been red-pilled by her own research, changed the name of her documentary to Red Pilled, and was going to make now a positive documentary. It was started out as she was going to character assassinate the men's rights movement. She did the research. She said, I can't do that. That's not the truth. And instead, she made a documentary highlighting the men's rights movement and showing that there was legitimacy to it. Well, that went against the agenda of the powers that be that control the mainstream media, and Cassie J was brutally character assassinated for releasing what had been a truthful documentary about the men's rights movement and how these weren't hateful people. They were actually highlighting injustices against men in what is alleged to be a patriarchy by the mainstream media. And the documentary goes over many case studies that are easily verifiable as to how independent journalists are character assassinated by the mainstream media for pushing agendas that go against the agenda of the mainstream media. And then, of course, the documentary goes to show how the mainstream media's power comes from narrative itself. And it uses many examples, but take this little test. Take this little test. How many white people can you name that have been shot and killed by police officers? Can you name any? By the way, while you're pondering this, for people watching on the phone on FFR News, please follow my YouTube channel. You get a much better picture. And if you would all please follow Classical Learner. That is my new YouTube channel that will become my primary posting ground in the near future. Once I build it up, I'm doing that slowly. And please follow Classical Learner on Facebook. I am posting both links in the comments section here of the live video chat. So please follow that. So now that I've let some time go by, have you been able to think of any white person that has been killed in a police shooting? Now, can you name a black person? Well, of course you can. We hear about these all the time. Michael Brown, Gardner, there wasn't a shooting, but he was choked in New York City. But seemingly every time that a black person is shot by police, it's everywhere on the media and there's outrage. And rightfully so. If a person is shot by police, that should make the news because there should be a public debate, right? Police officers are government officials. So if a government official shoots and kills a citizen, there should be public attention drawn to that so the public can be aware. The public can make a decision. Hey, is the government just gunning us down, or are these shootings in some way justified? Now, undoubtedly, some police shootings are justified. The police officer's life was in danger, and some police shootings aren't justified. I've seen police shootings where a man is shot in his back without a weapon when running away. Not justified. So if you're looking at it objectively, you can look at it at a case-by-case basis, say some shootings are justified, some shootings aren't justified. But I have no problem with the media drawing attention to black people being shot by police officers. What I have a problem with is the narrative. Because no one could name a white person that's been shot by a police officer. But white people, or twice as many white people, are shot and killed by police officers than black people. This is how the media controls narrative. Now, I get that more goes into it, that white people are a larger percentage of the population. I get all of that. I could also run statistics back at you, say black people commit a much higher percentage of murders. They commit 50% of the murders in the country, so it would make sense they're in gunfights more with police officers. I get all the statistics. That's not relevant, people. The bottom line is, if the media was being honest and twice as many white people are shot by police as black people, at least some of these shootings would be highlighted by the media. The media would say, hey, this isn't right. But the media controls through narrative, and they know if they start to highlight white people being shot, well, the relationship between white support for police officers as it is now might be fundamentally changed. White people might say, hey, you know what, black people have something to say here, they have an argument, and their agenda might be thwarted. And black people might say, hey, wait a second, this isn't just black people being targeted. Maybe the problem here is government. Maybe the problem here is the military-like mindset that police officers are forced to be in because there are so many laws on the books. It's tyranny through a million laws. So the media doesn't want people to see that. Instead, they want to use police shootings of black people to keep black people and white people divided. This is the matrix that's created, and Hoaxed does a very good job with many examples like this, exposing that matrix. So you see the multitude of ways in which the media controls people, whether it's through understanding their history, whether it's through character assassination, whether it's through narrative, whether it's through highlighting certain information and leaving other information out. So I do strongly recommend you watch Hoaxed because you might not agree with it all, you might not like Cernovich, but it does a very good job of highlighting what's happening in the world in front of you and the matrix, so to speak, the false reality that the media does a very effective job at creating. By the way, if you could please share this link, I would really appreciate it. And if you would please tag mothers and fathers of any age children, young children, elementary school, middle school, high school, tag them in this because I'm trying to do a really positive thing here. I'm trying to create a platform which assists parents in properly educating their children so that their children have a much easier time in life and we can make the world a better place. So please, please, please do that. Tell your friends about my channel. I can't grow without you. It makes a big difference. I did a complete pivot from what I was doing, which was hardcore news, and it would have been easy to stay down that road. I was making videos, some that got 100,000 views, some... Thank you, I really appreciate that, Hang the Traitors. And very enthusiastic name, by the way. I was making videos, hard-hitting political videos. I had videos that got over 100,000 views. Many of them got tens of thousands, but I decided to pivot for a multitude of reasons. But I want to change the world from the grassroots level, and I want to assist parents in educating their children. My major in college was, I had a bachelor's in history education and my master's program in which I graduated with the highest GPA, 4.0 GPA in my program was in early childhood education. I am very, very good at this stuff, and I completely reject the mainstream media. I'm the mainstream media, the public education system. I'm homeschooling my child myself, and I am going to change the world. I am going to help hundreds of thousands of people either homeschool their children or unschool their children so that they can combat the propaganda coming out of the media and the schooling system. So please share those links. But let's get into the case studies now, all right? Because I want to talk about how our children are taught, what we were taught, and the reason that people have such a hard time interpreting the world in front of them. They can't break out of the matrix. By the way, I just shut all that stuff off now. It's so toxic. I don't even want to hear what the Matrix has to say because you do what I did. I mean, I created TomFFRnews. I was literally reading, 50, 100 articles a day, and not just reading the articles, but researching into the articles, and I'll show you how, to the point where I know that almost everything you see in the mainstream is complete and utter, that's sign language for bullcrap. So, let's talk about why we can't interpret the truth. Take two children. We have child A. we have child B. Again, for my people on FFR News, you get a much better look at this if you just subscribe to the YouTube channel because the angle's upward. So you have child A and child B. Child A attends public school. Child A was me. Child A was you. And how are they taught? Let's talk about history class, right? Right? Let's put that on there. We got history class, all right? Child A and child B. So child A, they're handed a textbook. And they learn about the Civil War. And they say there was this battle, there was that battle, they say there was scorched earth, there was the Emancipation Proclamation, and all of this, forced conscription, and they talk about all that was the Civil War. They talk about the generals, they talk about Stonewall Jackson, they talk about Ulysses S. Grant, they talk about Abraham Lincoln. So they talk about all that was the Civil War. And you're getting your crash course, right? The children are giving their crash course in volume information about the Civil War. Your textbook's here, this is what happened. And then you're given your test and you repeat back to the teacher, hey, I studied, I memorized what happened in the Civil War, and now I have an understanding. And you repeat back to the teacher, this is what happened. This is what happened. What you're really being taught is that truth comes from authority. The textbook is the authority, and your teacher is the authority. You're learning information that authority tells you in volume, and you're just repeating back what you had learned. And now you're being taught that because it was in the textbook, because your teacher gave you that information, that what you had learned is the truth. You're being taught that truth comes from authority. And that's how you discover truth. And when that person gets older, they go through all of this schooling, all of this textbook memorization learning, and they turn on the mainstream media, they have been indoctrinated to believe that truth comes from authority. So when the New York Times or the Washington Post or Fox News or the CNN tells people what is happening in the world, that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, that babies are being thrown out of incubators, truth is the what? All right, well, authority told me what is happening, and therefore that is the truth. So people, their method of discovering truth is to seek truth from authority, and that is taught. That's the real lesson taught. It's not the information. It's not the Emancipation Proclamation. It's not the different battles that you're taught about in the textbook. What you're taught is the real lesson that truth is what comes from authority. And that's why people can't distinguish truth when they get into the real world. That's why people can't learn from themselves. That's why people can't teach themselves new skills outside of what they are taught in what is said to be, what is the school system, which is completely different from education. You know, I was thinking the other day that they say you go to school for your education. Since when do you not control something that's yours? Now let's go to Child B. Child B is asked to learn about the Civil War. So you have that child read a book about the Civil War. You say, okay, what about that book interested you? And you let your child take their time, right? Rather than going, for 1 month we're going to learn about the Civil War, you're going to learn all of these key terms and learn in volume about what happened. You're going to read a book. I'm going to ask you what interested you about that book. And you say, you know, I thought that Ulysses S. Grant was a very interesting person written about in that book. So then I say, okay, well, now I want you to go back and research writings by Ulysses S. Grant. Finite. Rather than volume learning everything that happened in the Civil War, now I have the child take their time. Go read the writings of Ulysses S. Grant. Now that's interesting. And after they read the books or the primary documents, you talk to them about what Ulysses S. Grant was writing about, what Ulysses S. Grant was thinking, what Ulysses S. Grant was concerned about, what the strategy was. And you say, okay, well, that's interesting. Why don't you research the opposing strategy? Okay. So then you have your child read the primary documents, whether it's a book or whether it's just the writings of Stonewall Jackson. And you have them read about Stonewall Jackson. You're not learning the volume of, hey, this is what happened in the Civil War, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, memorize it. Your child's getting into the actual writings of the people involved, maybe taking, instead of 1 month, spending 5 months on the Civil War. But what they're learning to do is research. What they're learning to do is think critically. They're learning not what to think, how to think. Because through their research, they're getting back to primary documents. They're discovering, oh, well, I know this is true because in the cable, in the writing between Ulysses S. Grant and Abraham Lincoln, Grant wrote this to Lincoln. They're starting to get a real understanding of the world, and they're learning, what they're learning is that truth comes from discovery of getting back to the origins of information. What you learn from the mainstream media is secondary information. An anonymous government official tells me that Donald Trump is a really bad person. That could be true. I'd rather hear it from the anonymous official himself. So you're learning how to think, not what to think. And you're getting a much better understanding of the Civil War than you ever will with this volume What Learning, right? And you say, oh no, but your child then spends 5 months on the Civil War and they don't learn everything that happened. Well, first I would argue that. I would argue that give them the 5 months and they'll know more about the Civil War as a child than most people will know their entire lives. But it doesn't matter because it's teaching them how to think. Who cares about volume? Who cares about volume? You want to teach your child to think critically. You want to teach your child to do research. Because if they know how to think, not what to think, as they get older, when they become adults, they could figure anything out. And if they could figure out anything, they could problem solve, they could figure out what is true, what is false. Your child will find a way to be successful. And in the long run, when they're 18, they will know much more in terms of volume than the what learners, the textbook learners, will ever know. And by the way, this makes learning interesting. It keeps their thirst for learning. And then finally, with the textbook volume learning, you have testing and you have the children write papers. Now, the papers, I like. The testing, it's just memorize the information. You have 1 month to memorize everything that we tell you, the what of the Civil War, and repeat that information back. Well, you don't know if any of that's true because you haven't discovered it. You just repeat it back what the textbook tells you. Paper learning, writing papers is much more effective. So what you say is, you read your book on Ulysses S. Grant. Now I'd like you to write me a paper explaining what you learned, whatever, who, what, where, when, why, of Ulysses S. Grant and what he wrote. What was his thesis? What were his primary concerns? And then with that paper, you have a conversation with your child. All right, so now tell me the thesis of your paper. And you have them give a presentation. Maybe you have them present it to the entire family. Stand up in front of the room and present what you learned, not just to me and mom, but maybe to the extended family. Tell us about Ulysses S. Grant. They're learning public speaking. Then you open it up to a Q&A and have people ask them questions. And they're learning to think on the fly. They're learning to think critically. And after all that's done, sit down with your child and go through the Socratic method and think logically about all the conclusions they drew. See if you could find any logical contradictions in your questioning of your child. And now you're teaching them how to think logically and how to combat a devil's advocate narrative. You're teaching your child how to read, how to think critically, how to get back to primary documents, how to formulate an argument in writing a paper, how to present an argument and speak publicly, how to answer Q&As, how to defend their position using logic. This is what an education looks like. Because it's yours. It's your child's education. The school education is indoctrination. It's what thinking, not how thinking. Everything we do as educators, as parents, needs to focus on how thinking. Because how thinking leads to independent, capable adults who will be self-sufficient, who will be able to take care of themselves, who will be able to problem solve and think critically so that they can be their own boss and they can survive in the real world. How thinking is the focus of an education, not what thinking. Do you see the difference? Am I the only one who sees this? Because this is a proper education. School teaches us the what thinking. School teaches us the primary lesson of schooling is that truth is derived from authority. You educate the way I'm telling you to educate, and truth is derived from discovery. And that's the truth about truth. Tomorrow, I'm going to be talking about news articles. We are going to go over news articles together, and I am going to show you how thinking teaches children how to properly interpret information in the age of the internet. How to read through a news article and know if what you're reading is true or what you're reading is BS. That is a valuable skill, and that is what most people don't know how to do. Please click on the links I am posting right here. That's my Classical Learner on Facebook. Here is my Classical Learner on YouTube. I am slowly building those channels. If you want to support me financially, you could do so. I really appreciate it. www.patreon.com/FFRnews. I am going to be building an entire online community focused on the education of children, homeschooling and unschooling, and I am currently writing a book on the topic of the school system, education, and homeschooling. Eventually, I'll be making a documentary. Your support goes a long way. Please share this link. Please tag your friends in this link. And as always, long live liberty, power to the individual. Together, we will change the world.